It's easy to barricade ourselves behind closed doors, figuratively speaking, and lock ourselves in. Just listening to the news, we get a daily dose of fear and harshness, of hatred and violence. So it's easy to kind of lock ourselves into a room full of dark thoughts and feelings and feel very isolated. So many people are doing that. In fact, people have always done that. The sense of separation, a sense of threat. There's me, and then there's everybody else. Or there's me and us, and then there's everybody else out there, and it's scary. We tend to peek out from behind the barricades, and we look at each other with fear and distrust and feel really unsafe. Even here at IMCC, there are occasions sometimes when people who are new to our group come, and they're not quite sure, it seems, just who are we. They seem to respond in a very guarded way. And it's natural enough. Everybody wants a safe place, and that's certainly what we hope to create here for ourselves and each other. But this raises a huge area of inquiry, a huge area of practice. How do we emerge from behind the barricades of separation? How do we shine with our own authentic light to be with each other wisely and lovingly? How do we abide in well-being that's ongoing, continuous, not just every once in a while, or maybe not at all? How about continuous well-being? Tonight I want to talk about one way that we can look at this question and respond to it, and that's the area of blessing. The Buddha taught in a graduated manner. He started with very simple aspects of daily life, things that everyone can understand, and he moved progressively on from there. And he did this very patiently for 45 years. There's a beautiful teaching in the scripture of his called the Great or the Supreme Blessing Scripture, the Mahamangala Sutta. It's in a collection in the Pali Canon known as the Sutta Nipata. According to this scripture, a female deity of astounding beauty came to the Buddha, and she commented that people often think about and ponder about blessings, and they want to confer the well-being. They want the advantages, the sense, the experience of the well-being that blessings confer. And she asked the Buddha to tell her about supreme blessings. I should point out that this kind of preamble to the Buddha's scriptures is fairly common. A deity, or maybe many deities, come and ask for teaching. And I think it's possible that this kind of approach was an addition. Maybe some later monk thought it added to the stature of the Buddha to have even deities come to him to acknowledge his supreme wisdom. Today, we promote through websites and blogs and ads and Oprah. Well, the ancient Indians did it through deities. Not only a deity, but a female deity of astounding beauty. You wouldn't want to have an ugly deity. There's something certainly more compelling about a deity of astounding beauty. In the scripture it said that her beauty lit up the entire compound on Anathapindika's park where the Buddha was staying. So the Buddha made a rather short response to this deity. In the Supreme Blessing Scripture, the Mahamangala Sutta, here's what he said. To associate not with the foolish, to be with the wise, to honor the worthy ones, this is a blessing supreme. To reside in a suitable location, to have good deeds done, to set oneself in the right direction, this is a blessing supreme. great learning and craft, and a discipline well trained in. Whatever utterance is well spoken, this is a blessing supreme. To be well caring of mother, of father, looking after spouse and children, to engage in a harmless occupation, this is a blessing supreme. Selfless giving, living the just life, open hands to all relatives, and blameless action, this is a blessing supreme. To cease and abstain from evil, complete restraint from intoxicants, to be diligent in virtuous practices, this is a blessing supreme. To be reverent and humble, content and grateful, to hear the Dhamma at the right time, this is a blessing supreme. To be patient and obedient, the seeing of recluses, to discuss the Dhamma at the right time, this is a blessing supreme. To live austerely and purely, to see the noble truths, and to realize Nibbana, this is the blessing supreme. A mind-heart unshaken when touched by the worldly states, sorrowless, stainless, and secure, this is the blessing supreme. Those who have fulfilled all these are everywhere invincible. They find well-being everywhere. Theirs is the blessing supreme. So the Maha Mangala Sutta, the Supreme Blessing Scripture, I think we should notice that, first of all, this scripture is a description of blessings, how to live life, so the blessing of well-being is conferred. It is not the act of the Buddha conferring a blessing or a benediction. And another thing to notice about this is that it was a really radical message. He is saying, the Buddha said, you need to practice these things yourself to find out. You need to live your life in such a way that there is well-being. And to appreciate just how radical this was, and probably still is, although our circumstances have changed, how radical it was, is to recognize that during the Vedic era in which the Buddha lived, Brahmin priests officiated at ceremonies. It was understood that only the Brahmin priests had the power to commune with divinity. No ordinary person could do that. So it was only the Brahmin priests who could confer blessings on other people. And what the Buddha is saying, very radically, is no, you can do it yourself. It's how you live your life. Just appreciating the depth of what the Buddha was discussing and suggesting. Also, I think it's important to recognize that he describes every aspect as a blessing supreme. In this scripture, every single thing he talked about, he designated as a supreme blessing. To associate with the wise, do good deeds, set oneself in the right direction, giving generously, being reverent, humble, patient. All these, each of these, a blessing supreme. Each one is to be honored, and no one was considered more or less important than the others. And here, I think it's significant to recognize that the Buddha was aware that many of his followers were householders. They were lay people who had never become monks, and they weren't going to be spending a lot of time in formal practice. And he wanted to underscore the blessing of all these teachings for them in their daily life. I think a really compassionate response then on his part. And at the same time, we need to remember that the Buddha's teaching is a graduated teaching or a progressive teaching. And the implication, the message is clear. Don't stop at any one level. Not to think that any one of these alone, any one of these categories or actions alone is enough. Because the Buddha, as he taught, the Buddha taught impermanence. Impermanence is constant. Nothing stays the same. Like you reside in a suitable location, which he advocates, and then you find the neighborhood changes. It's no longer suitable. Or you set yourself in the right direction, as the Buddha taught, and somehow, somewhere along the way, you get waylaid and distracted for a while, maybe for years. Or you care for your parents, and they die, and your children mature, and they move away. And your spouse, well, as we know, it's not always roses and blessings with spouses and partners. So you get the idea, whatever we do or try to, even when it's with an open heart and mind, it doesn't always work out as we wish. Yes, these things confer a sense of well-being, but not always. They are contingent on circumstances, and as the Buddha taught, that confers suffering. Circumstances change, suffering results. Finally, the Buddha caps this list of supreme blessings with the comment, a mind, heart unshaken, when touched by worldly states, sorrowless, stainless, and secure, this is the blessing supreme. So, there we are, blessing supreme, a mind, heart unshaken, when touched by worldly states. Yes, we need to participate in all aspects of life as it opens in our life to do so. But the direction of all the Buddha's teaching is that freedoms from suffering, abiding well-being, is not contingent on changing circumstances. This, finally, is how to shine with authentic light, how to be in the world, the Buddha is saying. How to emerge from the isolating barricades that we erect in our mind. They drop away when there is a heart-mind, or they have dropped away when there's a heart-mind that's unshaken, even when touched by worldly states. I think we could say that this is the mother of supreme blessings. Now, it's easy to get the impression from this scripture and from many of the other Buddhist teachings that all you need to do is do the things he prescribes, and bingo, there's abiding well-being, an unshakable mind-heart will happen. But in fact, the blessing supreme, or the mother of supreme blessings, is not simply a matter of addition. It's not doing enough wise, good stuff and then add them all up and you'll automatically get there. Making lots of effort, working hard, practicing hard, lots of meditation, it's important. But it doesn't automatically mean the blessing supreme, the mother of all supreme blessings. Because in fact we can train and get very ego-centered, very proud of our training, for example. We can train hard and go just the other direction. Instead of getting proud, feel extremely incompetent. Everybody else has done so much more. This is not a mind-heart unshaken. So it's not simply a matter of addition. The more you do, the better it is. Now the Buddha wasn't too clear about this. It's not simply a matter of addition, and a lot of people misunderstood that in his day, and in ours too. In Zen, the point is much more clearly stated. There's a story or a legend about the founder of the Zen tradition in China. His name was Bodhidharma. He was an Indian monk, a patriarch who at the end of the 5th century traveled by ship from India to South China. And he wandered around South China, trying to teach there, and it would be teaching in the Zen tradition. And he wasn't too successful initially. And then he was invited by the emperor of a southern Chinese dynasty at the time, the Liang dynasty. He met with this emperor in Nanjing and had an interview with him. And according to the legend, the emperor asked Bodhidharma, he said, what merit had he himself accumulated, that is, how merit had he, the emperor, accumulated for his subsequent lives as a result of all his good works? The emperor was indeed a Buddhist, but he had a fairly superficial understanding, and perhaps one that prevailed amongst most people who were Buddhists in that day. And there was the understanding that the more good works you do, the more merit you accumulate. Like there's some big calculation somewhere, and the more merit you have, then you're assured of a better rebirth. And I should say, for most people who weren't monastics, the idea of enlightenment seemed so remote. They weren't thinking about enlightenment, they were rather thinking about a better rebirth so that maybe some lifetime in the future they might attain enlightenment. So basically this was the first question that the emperor asked Bodhidharma. What merit had he accumulated from all the good works he'd done? Because he did. He took a great deal of effort. He made a great deal of effort to help his people with the idea that he wanted to accumulate merit. And although we here in the West in our days don't have quite that understanding, first of all, lots of people don't believe in rebirth, but I think that deep down for many of us there's a thought that if we do good, as you sow, so shall you reap. More good will come back to you. So at any rate, in any way that you can touch into this story, that's great. Well, Bodhidharma's response to the emperor's question was no merit. It was shocking. Like, no merit? All those good works and no merit? It was really outrageous as far as the emperor was concerned. He asked Bodhidharma a couple more questions along similar lines, and he was getting more outraged with each response. And finally, as the legend goes, Bodhidharma had to run for his life. He actually risked his life in responding, no merit. And according to the legend, what he did was Bodhidharma fled to a monastery in the mountains in Henan province, Shaolin Monastery. And that's where he taught the Dharma, Mahayana Zen style. And he also taught the monks a powerful form of Kung Fu in self-defense, according to the legend. And maybe we ought to add that a subsequent emperor destroyed that monastery a short time later, and it's been destroyed and rebuilt several times. But the point we're making here, aside from the obvious fact that you need to be careful what you say to emperors, but since most of us will never have that problem, maybe the more important point to recognize anyway is that what Bodhidharma was saying is that it's not simply addition. It's not simply a matter of more effort, more good works, and you're going to accumulate a lot of merit. He said, finally, there needs to be a shift in consciousness. This is what they were teaching in Zen. This is the implication. This is the bottom line. An awakening, a qualitative shift, not simply a matter of quantitative input. Ultimately, the Buddha's teaching points to this kind of shift in consciousness. Now, what does it mean, a shift in consciousness? An awakening. And basically, what it means is that there's no longer an identifying solely with the person you thought you were. That small, isolated person who sometimes lives behind barricades, maybe fearful, and sometimes maybe not. No longer identifying solely with that one, but rather seeing the underlying wholeness, the essential wholeness of reality, of which one is a part. Now, this isn't an intellectual understanding. It's something that's beyond intellect. It's a knowing. It's a new perspective. Because usually we do think we are the center of the universe. What always comes up for me is a comment that Hobbes the Tiger in the old Calvin and Hobbes cartoons used to say. And he said, human beings think that they're such big screaming deals. And we do. The center of the universe, even when we think, oh, I'm inadequate, I'm unlovable, I'm a miserable failure. It's all about centering and living through our own experience. It's all about me, whether we think we're terrific or we think we're a miserable failure. That's being self-centered. A big screaming deal. From the point of view of this awakening, the shift in consciousness, whether we're a failure or a brilliant success doesn't matter. In the context of wholeness, the stories of our life are irrelevant. It's like, what a surprise. So this shift or awakening is ultimately the blessing supreme, or the beginning of it. What the teacher Adyashanti says in The End of Your World, he said, our greatest contribution to humanity is our awakening. It is literally to leave the state of consciousness that the mass of humanity is in, and discover the truth of our being, which is the truth of all beings. When we do this, we come back as a gift, a newborn. We are, in a certain sense, reborn. I think you could say that we come back as a blessing with a capital B. Now, this may occur gradually or it may occur suddenly. Either way, the shift in consciousness occurs, and once there is a glimpse of this reality, of that you're not who you think you are usually, there's no going back and completely forgetting it. I mean, we can and do lose sight of it, and then we regain it and go back and forth, forgetting and remembering. But there's a way in which, once seen, it's never completely forgotten. You know, to simplify all this, I think of that image where you see two faces in profile looking at each other. When you look at it in one way and you look at it in another way, and you see a face view or a vase view. Once you have seen both perspectives, you can't go back to just seeing one. You can't pretend that you no longer see the faces if you've already seen them. So it's somewhat like that. Once both, and once the perspective, the wholeness is seen, it can't be completely forgotten. And again, while we can fall back into polishing our stories, as most people, how we live our lives, my story, polishing it over and over, and the more we polish it, the more we believe, the more we hold on. Everybody else is polishing and believing their own stories, and we're all kind of busy polishing together. And I guess you could say one big unhappy family of polishers, because our stories can't bring enduring happiness. Not a lasting blessing. They can't confer the well-being of the blessing supreme that the deity finally was asking about. So, the Buddha is ultimately teaching about seeing, there's this other perspective, the perspective of wholeness. Of course, the problem with all this is that you just don't see the broader perspective because you want to. The shift in consciousness, the awakening, happens when you're ready, when you relax into it, let go, drop the intellectual knowing and move beyond the intellect. That's when you begin to see yourself as a part of wholeness. When the sense of a separate self drops away even for an instant, that's the beginning. And as I said, you can't practice to make it happen. What we can do and are called to do is to practice as much as we can, to make ourselves ready or ripe so that the awakening does happen. It's beyond our control. Some people who have talked about this talk about an awakening is like an accident, and at most we make ourselves accident prone. You know, some people in our community have experienced this. Several months ago, some members of our community shared their stories about their shifts in consciousness. And for those of you who haven't, and it's important to hear about it, because otherwise it's easy to get deluded about our practice and to become either very goal-oriented and again think it's all a matter of addition, or to get really discouraged and think, oh, I'm completely inadequate here. Neither of them works. Neither confers a lasting sense of well-being. So the point is not to worry about it. Practice with diligence, as the Buddha taught, and know that what's going to happen will happen in its own time. We can trust that. So ultimately, blessing is a state of being. It's not an event that happens to us. We typically think of blessing as something that someone else will do to us or that we do to another. And that indeed really is beautiful, to bless ourselves and others. But on a deeper level, we can understand that that still is dualistic, relying upon a sense of self and a sense of others. So, remembering, as again Ajahn Shanti said, our greatest contribution to humanity is our awakening, and trusting to go beyond that. It will happen in its own time. That is the blessing supreme.